What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily, and in this video, we are checking out the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. I'm going to break down everything you need to know about the A13 5G, of course. There's definitely a lot to go over, but first things first, let me just quickly show you the unboxing experience because we actually have some important changes here already. For the first time, I believe, on an A-series phone, Samsung has shipped the device in that super slim box, reminiscent of the flagship S-series phones that, as you guys know, dropped some included accessories. And unfortunately, that's also what we have here. So cutting open the box and sliding off the sleeve, the first thing we see is a small packet of stuff, and inside there's the usual quick start guide and a USB-C to USB-C cable. That's noteworthy because these A-series phones usually would come with a USB-C to USB-A and an older style USB-A wall plug, but not with this phone. The cable is actually all you get now. It's kind of a weird change when you think about it, since I would imagine most previous Samsung A-series owners are used to that USB-A charging setup. Underneath that stuff, there's the phone itself, of course, and we'll check out that in just a moment. The only other thing at the very bottom of the box is your SIM ejector tool stuck into a piece of cardboard there, and that's it. Like I said, no more included charging brick, no clear case for the phone. The A-series seems to have succumbed to Samsung's minimalist, accessory-less packaging decision now too. So with all that stuff out of the way, here is the A13 5G once again. So those of you who are at least somewhat familiar with Samsung's A-series lineup probably recognize that this phone looks pretty familiar once again, at least from the front. The 6.5-inch display, corner to corner, is pretty much the same size, shape, and setup as last year's A12. And with that, you get a teardrop notch up top for the selfie camera, noticeable side bezels, and a slightly thicker bottom chin. Based on the dimensions, we have just a slightly lower screen-to-body ratio, actually, 81%, but I actually consider this phone to be relatively manageable with one-handed use. It's certainly still big and tall, but it's actually fairly thin and lightweight, so that makes things somewhat comfortable. Overall, if you're used to an A12 or other similar 6.5-inch smartphone, you'll feel right at home using this one. Around back, the A13 5G is all plastic. We get just one color choice for now, kind of a matte black that actually looks really nice. It's simple, minimalist, a bit stealthy. Everything about the build, though, lets you know it is a budget device. So keep that in mind. You don't get any waterproof rating or wireless charging either, but like I mentioned already, it's a thin, flat phone, just enough curve and taper along the sides to make the phone feel thin and comfortable in the hand. Cheaper materials aside, I do really like the look and feel, and I think the slight design change overall is a positive. Samsung also changed up the rear camera setup too, obviously, and that adds to its nicer looking design for sure. It's a simple 3-lens look, no bump, no real bulge, and compared to some other takes on the camera module, I think this is the best look of them all. Taking a peek around at everything else, on the left side, the A13 5G does have a dual SIM and SD card tray for expandable storage. You're stuck with just one 64 gig configuration option for this phone right now, so that SD card slot is a must in my opinion. On the right, the usual volume buttons and power button, which does double as your fingerprint sensor. This setup is great. It's quite a bit faster than I expected. You barely have to even touch the thing before it recognizes it and unlocks. It's placed just right, it's lightning fast, and it's a simple yet very welcome addition to this phone. Across the bottom, the headphone jack is still there, alongside the USB-C port for charging and the single speaker setup, which to me sounds exactly like all the other single speakers from every other A-series phone. And here's a quick sound sample so you can get an idea. So let's talk about what's new with this A13 5G. And first up is the display. Now yes, most of the specs are still the same here. The 6.5-inch screen is still a PLS TFT panel, basically LCD. It's once again a 1600 by 720 resolution, packing in just 270 pixels per inch, but it is now an adaptive 90 Hz display. With just your average everyday movie binging and video watching, I do think the A13 5G delivers a decent looking picture for what it is. Being an LCD setup, setup, you're gonna get some off-axis dimming for sure, but straight on, the phone is fairly bright and relatively colorful, though there is a bit of a cool blue tint that tends to be more common on these budget A-series displays. Also, the 720 resolution on a phone this size, like I always say, is less than ideal. You can pick out the pixels if you want to look closely enough, but assuming you're watching your content at a normal viewing distance, it's not a huge deal. The 90Hz add-on though, I think is pretty nice. With this, the phone feels absolutely faster and more responsive. Every touch, tap, and swipe is smoother, and I actually think in this sort of budget category specifically, a lot of folks will notice the upgrade. Adding a 90Hz adaptive display is a great way to kind of get a faster, more fluid, more responsive feel that I know people will appreciate. Speaking of speed boosts, the internals powering the A13 5G are also surprisingly solid. Inside, this phone gets the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G chipset and 4 gigs of RAM standard. If you remember last year, the A12 packed the MediaTek P35 and there were 2 gig RAM configurations. So by comparison, when we look at the Antutu and Geekbench numbers here, for example, the A13 5G is technically 2 to 3 times more capable and significantly more powerful than last year's A12. And that's really great. It's actually something I noticed right out of the box. The A13 feels snappy, it feels ready to go. I've experienced significantly less delay in opening certain apps, less frame drop when scrolling through busy web pages or news feeds. Overall, this is a substantial, noticeable, and much appreciated spec bump. And if you maybe had any issues at all with the A12, I actually think you're going to be blown away when you use the A13. It's really that much better. And to be honest, even if you're a more heavy user for work, for gaming, for whatever else, I do think this phone is going to be able to handle a lot more day-to-day with ease versus some of the previous A-series phones. So all in all, the specs here are fantastic. I think it's where Samsung put the most of their focus in, and I'm really excited to use this phone to see how much it can handle on all the things that I throw at it. I really do think there's a lot of potential here. Also, the A13 5G does pack a 5,000 milliamp battery inside. That's sort of been the standard for most of the A-series phones recently, and I think it's definitely a good size to get you through at least a day's use under normal circumstances, but more than likely a day and a half or more if you aren't using your phone too much. Charging speeds here max out at 15 watts once again, which is okay. It's not the fastest, but for a budget phone, it's not unexpected. And I already mentioned no wireless charging, no included power brick, so it's really the big battery alone that's the standout power feature. And I think, like most other Samsung A-series phones, you can expect some solid use time day to day. Finally, let's break down what's new and what's changed with that updated camera setup around back. The triple lens setup now has a slightly upgraded 50 megapixel f1.8 aperture main lens, a 2 megapixel macro lens once again, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor, which we've also seen before. What you don't have here, unfortunately, is the ultra wide lens, which was on the A12, and to be honest, removing that and still offering the useless macro lens for whatever reason is pretty disappointing. Also, the selfie camera seems to have changed as well. It's back to being a 5 megapixel f2.0 aperture shooter. The specs don't actually tell the whole tale, though I think this phone produces a really good looking selfie pic for what it is. These are just a couple quick test shots out of the box, but I like the look, I like the amount of detail, the skin tone is fairly accurate. It's a bit dull color-wise, certainly overexposed. It's a very bright picture, but there's a good foundation for selfies. Inside the camera app, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to work with. What's here is basically just 2 to 10x digital zoom, portrait mode, and video, and then the basic pro controls, panorama, radial blur, and macro. What you don't see are things like night mode, slow-mo, or any other video modes for that matter, just 1080-30, and seemingly no additional stabilization either. There's a 50 megapixel mode for pictures, but I think you can tell that overall the camera capabilities are pretty basic to say the least, and I don't think Samsung needed to sacrifice so much in the camera department for this phone. A few more test shots here with the rear lens show me that the pictures do look pretty good. I think there's a lot of positive image processing with a more powerful chipset, tons of detail, good color. It's just that aside from simple point and shoot shots, you're pretty limited with what you get. And I think there should have been a half a dozen or so more camera modes and features added in here. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though, and I'll see you guys later.